Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. We're diving deep today
The
into the Boeing crew flight test, CFT.
Go CFT. That's the one.
This one had so much
Oh, yeah.
material you guys sent us.
A lot to unpack. Articles,
Yeah.
updates from NASA,
So let me
everything.
break it all down for you.
Yeah, we want to give you the real story of what this mission was all about.
Basically, like your one-stop shop for all things.
Boeing's big moment,
Rich.
their very first crewed launch of the Starliner capsule.
Hmm?
We're going to talk about what they wanted to achieve.
Meet the crew.
Brave crew.
Yeah, these are the folks who strapped in and went up on that.
Powerful.
Oh, yeah.
Atlas V rocket.
All the way back on June 5th, 2024.
And the initial plan.
It seemed simple enough.
Just a quick 8-day trip to the International Space Station.
The ISS.
And then landing back here in the Southwest.
8 days. That's like a...
Vacation.
Almost.
Right. Things got a little more complicated.
Yes, a little. When we started digging into everything you sent,
Oh, yeah.
this mission definitely took on a life of its own.
It really did. Way beyond that initial week.
So let's jump in
Let's do it.
to the CFT saga.
All right, let's rewind a bit first.
Okay.
Back to before the mission even launched.
Your mission. Got it.
Boeing's journey with this whole commercial crew program
Right.
wasn't
That
exactly...
smooth sailing.
There were some big delays.
I remember that.
Like the original target for the first crewed flight
Way back when.
was 2017.
2017.
So by the time CFT actually blasted off in 2024,
That's 7 years later.
7 years, a lot had happened.
A lot of history. And before they could even think about putting people on board.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They had those.
Uncrewed test flights.
Uncrewed. So OFT
That was the first one,
back in 2019.
which
Hmm?
didn't quite hit the mark.
No, it did not.
Software issues.
Yeah, they had some major problems that prevented Starliner from reaching
The ISS.
the whole point of the mission,
It just shows you how hard it is.
to build these things from scratch.
Spacecraft are not easy.
No, they are not. And OFT in 2019, it really brought to light
Right.
how complex the software is
Oh, yeah.
for these incredibly critical systems.
Software can make or break a mission.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
Then we had OFT 2.
That was in 2022.
Yeah, and even that one had its own.
Snag.
Yeah, a scrub in 2021.
Valve problems, I think.
Valve problems, exactly. But when it finally flew,
It worked.
met all the objectives.
So the program was moving forward.
It was, but definitely not without its bumps in the road.
So there were delays
Yeah,
and then more delays.
even more.
In August 2023, Boeing announced they were pushing things back even further.
Pushing back the crewed flight to at least March of 2024.
And the reasons for this,
Oh, they were.
kind of a big deal.
They found some issues with the parachutes.
Yeah. Concerns about their strength.
Yeah, not strong enough. And then there was the whole wiring issue.
Oh, yeah.
Potentially flammable materials.
Yeah. Flammable materials in the wiring harnesses. That's scary stuff.
Very scary. And this is why safety is so important.
Unnegotiable.
Exactly. For human spaceflight,
Yeah.
finding those issues so late in the game,
Yeah, I was cutting it close.
it was. And that's why they launched multiple investigations.
I remember that.
Imagine finding like a crack
Yeah.
in the foundation of a building.
Like a skyscraper or something.
Yeah, right before you're about to open it up. You have to stop everything.
Yeah, I have to fix that.
You have to fix it, no matter how long it takes.
No matter the delay and those investigations.
They added to the timeline.
Of course.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the capsule itself.
Okay.
Starliner Calypso. This wasn't its first rodeo.
You're right. It had already flown a mission,
An uncrewed one.
uncrewed, but it got some upgrades.
They weren't just going to send it up again as a...
No, they did a whole bunch of modifications after that first flight.
Like what?
They improved the parachutes,
Okay, good.
the airbags too,
Mm-hmm.
and they even changed the docking system.
The docking system.
Yeah, they had to tweak it for a new re-entry cover.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that new cover was actually first used on OFT2. It shows you how they're constantly learning
Learning from mistakes.
and using those lessons to make the spacecraft safer.
So safer for the next mission. And speaking of the next mission, the crew.
The crew.
It wasn't always set in stone
Well, the lineup changed a few times.
over the years.
All those delays, it's not just about the hardware being ready.
Right.
The astronauts have to be available too.
They have schedules.
And sometimes there are medical reasons
Right.
that can change who flies and when.
Like Nicole Mann. She was supposed to be on this flight.
She was, which would have
It's a
been
huge...
historic. The first woman ever
Yeah.
on a maiden crewed orbital flight,
Mm.
but she got reassigned.
To a SpaceX mission.
Yep. And then there was Eric Boe
He stepped down.
for medical
It
reasons.
was Chris Ferguson as well.
Yeah, family commitments.
So in the end,
Is Barry E. Wilmore.
and Sunita Williams.
With Michael Fink as backup.
And Sunita Williams.
She still made history
She did.
as the first woman to be on the very first crewed flight
Wow.
of a brand new orbital spacecraft. That's incredible.
Definitely a long road to get to that launch.
Absolutely. And, with all the delays and everything,
Yeah.
the excitement was just building and building.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when you think about the history of launches from Cape Canaveral.
The history.
This was the first crewed launch from there since
Get this.
Apollo 7
Apollo 7.
back in 1968.
1968.
A long time.
That's a very long time.
And the last time an Atlas rocket launched people from there
Wow.
was Mercury Atlas 9
Mercury Atlas 9.
in 1963.
Talk about bridging history.
Bridging history.
Okay, so they finally made it to May 2024.
Launch time.
Ready for liftoff.
Hmm.
But getting to orbit,
It wasn't easy.
not at all. They had not one,
Not 2,
but 3
3,
launch attempts.
3.
Let's start with that first try.
All right. May 6th.
May 6th.
And what's so crazy is that even the smallest little problem
Yeah.
can scrub a launch.
When you've got people on board.
People's lives are at stake.
Absolutely. So what happened on May 6th?
So they had this oxygen pressure relief valve
Okay.
on the Centaur upper stage of the Atlas V.
The Atlas V.
And it was chattering.
Chattered.
Yeah, it's making this weird vibration. It was actually something they'd seen before.
Those other Atlas V flights.
Yeah. And usually they could fix it pretty easily.
Ow.
Just by cycling the valve, opening and closing it a few times.
So like a reset.
Yeah, basically.
But with Wilmore and Williams strapped in and ready to go,
Oh, no.
not a chance.
No way. Too risky.
They couldn't just tinker with it.
Nope. Safety regulations wouldn't allow it.
Right.
So they had to scrub the launch,
Abort,
abort, roll the rocket back,
back to
vertical integration facility,
or VIF.
replace the valve,
And that pushed the next launch attempt to
May 17th.
May 17th. And then,
Another curveball.
right,
They found a helium leak
a helium leak.
in the Starliner.
Oh, no. More delays.
More delays. It must have been so frustrating for everyone.
I bet.
But, that's the thing about these missions.
What's that?
You're taking a brand new spacecraft
Right.
and trying to make it work perfectly with this
Yeah.
well-established launch vehicle.
It's like putting puzzle pieces together.
Exactly. And sometimes those pieces don't fit perfectly.
So they had this leak,
They did.
but they decided it was still safe to fly.
As long as the leak didn't get any worse.
They were monitoring it closely,
Very closely. They even came up with a backup plan,
just in case.
just in case. What if the propulsion system failed during re-entry?
That's the worst case scenario.
It is. But they had a plan.
That's good. So new launch date,
June 1st.
June 1st,
Another
and-
scrub.
another scrub
Yeah.
with just minutes to go.
T-minus 3 minutes and 50 seconds.
What happened this time?
This time it was a computer glitch.
A computer glitch.
One of the ground launch sequencer computers.
Those are important.
Critical. They control the final steps before launch.
So everything's automated.
And one of those computers started acting up,
Oh.
giving slower readings than normal.
And that triggered.
An automatic safety hold.
They had to stop everything
Had to. It shows how important the ground systems are.
for safety.
Absolutely. So they replaced the computer,
The whole chassis.
the whole chassis. And
Finally.
June 5th,
June 5th.
10:52 a.m. Eastern Time.
The engines ignited
And Wilmore and Williams were on their way.
on their way to space.
It was the 100th flight of an Atlas V rocket.
100 flights. That's amazing.
Pretty impressive.
And for this one, they used the N-22 configuration.
N-22, meaning
No fairing,
no fairing. 2 solid rocket boosters
2 boosters.
and 2 Centaur engines.
Wow. That's a powerful setup.
It is. The rocket did its job perfectly.
Got the Starliner capsule on a suborbital trajectory.
And then Starliner took over.
Using its own thrusters?
Yeah, to get into a stable orbit.
They were in space.
They were in space.
About 31 minutes after separating from the Atlas V.
31 minutes. But the challenges weren't over.
Right. Reaching orbit was just the beginning.
The trip to the ISS and docking.
There were some bumps along the way.
Yeah,
Let's talk about those.
Okay.
So once they were in orbit,
The crew started doing some manual maneuvering exercises.
manual maneuvering.
Yeah, they were testing Starliner's capabilities.
Making sure it could handle emergencies.
Exactly. They practiced pointing the antennas
Manually.
manually, orienting the solar panels
Towards the sun.
towards the sun. They even used the star trackers for navigation
Wow.
and did some manual orbital maneuvers.
So they were ready for anything.
They had to be. Even though the spacecraft is designed to be autonomous,
Right.
those manual skills are crucial,
Backups are important.
lifesavers. And then they ran into trouble
More trouble.
late on June 5th.
Same day they launched.
Same day.
Mm.
Mission Control saw it.
What did they see?
More helium leaks.
More. I thought they fixed that.
They thought so too.
Oh, no.
Not just one leak,
How many?
2 more. In different parts of the propulsion system.
The propulsion system.
Yeah. So the engineers, they closed off the helium manifolds.
As a precaution.
Yeah. Better safe than sorry. But that also meant
What?
6 of the RCS thrusters were offline.
RCS thrusters.
Those are the little jets that control Starliner's orientation.
So they lost 6 thrusters.
6.
That's a lot.
It is.
But Mission Control said they still had enough helium to finish the mission.
They did. But still.
Not ideal.
At first they thought it was just a couple of isolated incidents,
Right.
but then they found even more leaks
Even more.
after Starliner docked with the ISS.
Wow.
So maybe it was a bigger issue.
A systemic issue.
Yeah, something affecting the whole propulsion system. And then there was a 4th leak,
A 4th one.
smaller, once they were at the station.
So it wasn't just that one faulty seal they thought it was before the flight.
It wasn't.
And then they had problems during docking.
More thruster trouble
This is getting ridiculous.
as they got close to the ISS,
How close?
about 200 meters.
200 meters.
5 of the aft-facing RCS thrusters just stopped working.
5 more.
5 more.
What did that mean?
They lost full control.
Full control.
Yeah, they couldn't control the spacecraft's attitude and translation.
Attitude and translation, what does that mean?
It means they couldn't move in all 6 directions.
This direction.
Up, down, left, right, forward, backward.
Yeah.
And they couldn't rotate properly either.
So they were basically adrift.
Ooh, not quite. But they were in a tough spot.
What did they do?
The ground team jumped into action,
What did they do?
trying to reset those thrusters
Yeah. Remotely.
and doing hot fire tests.
To see if they'd respond.
Exactly. And the crew,
Hello? Wilmore and William.
they had to hold Starliner steady.
Outside the ISS keep-out zone.
It's a safety buffer around the station.
Makes sense.
They finally got 4 of the 5 thrusters working again,
4 out of 5.
and they got clearance to dock.
What a relief.
You know what's strange?
What?
They had a similar thruster problem during OFT-2.
The uncrewed test flight.
Yeah, same location on the spacecraft.
So maybe there's a design flaw there.
Maybe.
So after all that,
An hour late,
an hour
Starliner finally docked with the ISS,
on June 6th.
June 6th. Almost 27 hours after launch.
They made it.
They did. Docked with the Harmony module, forward port.
And they joined the Expedition 71 crew.
They did. They were finally there.
But it was a long and bumpy road.
It was.
So they were supposed to stay on the ISS for 8 days.
8 days. That was the plan.
But we know that didn't happen.
Oh, no. It turned into a much longer stay.
Much longer.
Way longer.
Way long. So once they were on board,
They got right to work.
transferring cargo,
Yeah, they brought up a bunch of supplies,
important stuff.
including a new urine processor pump.
That's essential.
It is. Imagine what would happen if that thing broke down.
Not good.
Not good at all. They also had to test Starliner as a safe haven.
Safe haven.
That's in case of emergencies on the ISS.
So the crew could evacuate to Starliner.
Exactly. It's a requirement for any crewed vehicle visiting the station,
And they had to do all their flight test objectives.
of course. See how the spacecraft performs in space?
Makes sense. But their stay kept getting extended.
It did.
And extended.
And extended.
What was the reason?
Those helium leaks
They still hadn't figured this out.
and the thruster problems.
Still acting up.
So they kept pushing back the undocking date.
First, it was June 22nd.
Then they pushed it even further into July.
Why?
They wanted to investigate those issues while the service module was still attached.
The service module, that's where the propulsion system is.
Exactly. It gets jettisoned before reentry.
So they had to gather as much data as possible while they could.
As much as possible. But the problems kept coming.
Oh, man.
They found a 5th helium leak.
A 5th one?
5.
Unbelievable. And then a new issue popped up.
With one of the RCS oxidizer isolation valves,
Another valve.
it wasn't closing properly,
So it was leaking.
potentially.
This is just a cascade of technical issues.
It was. But they were determined to figure it out.
So what did they do?
They did a bunch of tests on the ground
Ground tests.
at White Sands. They took an actual RCS thruster,
From Starliner.
not for Starliner, but the same model.
Okay.
And they ran it through the exact same mission profile.
Wow.
And they were able to replicate the thrust degradation.
They found the problem.
They think so. They found a deformed Teflon seal.
A seal.
It could have been restricting propellant flow.
Because it was deformed.
Yeah. They think the heat buildup might have caused it.
So that explains the thruster problems.
Well, sort of.
Sort of.
They tried to replicate the problem in space.
With the actual Starliner.
And sometimes the thrusters worked fine.
So it wasn't a consistent issue. So maybe
No.
it's more complicated than just a deformed seal.
Maybe.
Maybe there's something else going on.
It's hard to say. Space is a tricky environment.
It is. So weeks turned into months.
Months.
And the big question became,
Can they bring Wilmore and Williams back safely?
on Starliner.
Yeah. Boeing still had faith in the spacecraft.
But NASA had to consider all options.
They did. Crew safety is paramount.
They even thought about launching a SpaceX Crew 9 mission.
With empty seats.
Just to bring them home.
That's how seriously they were taking this.
And the planned Crew 9 launch was delayed.
From August to September,
Because Starliner was still docked at the ISS.
taking up a docking port.
So it was a big decision.
A huge decision.
But on August 24th,
They made the call.
NASA decided it was too risky.
Too risky to bring them back on Starliner.
So they came back on
SpaceX Crew Dragon.
in February 2025.
They joined a modified two-person Crew 9 mission.
Wow. That's a major change of plans.
It was. They had to work with SpaceX.
To make sure everything was safe.
They even developed a special emergency evacuation configuration.
For Crew Dragon.
Yeah, just in case. They could secure up to 3 crew members to the floor of the capsule.
That's incredible. They thought of everything.
They had to.
So the astronauts were coming home.
But what about Starliner?
It was still up there.
They had to bring it back to
Uncrewed.
uncrewed. And the original plan for re-entry,
Was pretty complex.
yeah, a spiral trajectory around the ISS,
A spiral.
and then a long burn to deorbit.
So they changed that.
They did. The undocking on September 6th was much
It
simpler.
was simpler.
They used a posigrade maneuver.
Posigrade.
Yeah, basically they just used the forward-facing thrusters.
Those were the ones that were working properly.
Exactly. And then they did the deorbit burn,
From a safe distance.
of course.
And a re-entry.
Went smoothly.
Parachutes deployed.
3 main parachutes. Slowed it down to about 4 miles per hour.
Nice and gentle.
And the airbags inflated
Perfect landing.
at White Sands,
White Sands Space Harbor, New Mexico.
September 7th.
All the potential landing sites were in the western U.S.
They had to make sure they could jettison the service module over the Pacific.
Right.
But even the uncrewed return wasn't perfect.
What happened?
She had a couple of new problems
2 problems.
during re-entry.
Oh no, what were they?
A glitch in the navigation system.
A glitch.
It was brief.
That's still a glitch.
And one of the thrusters failed.
Another thruster.
Yeah, one of the 12 they used for orientation.
During re-entry.
Yeah. And this thruster was different.
Different how?
It was a monopropellant thruster.
Monopropellant.
Yeah, it worked independently from the service module's propulsion system.
The one with all the helium leaks.
Yeah. So even in the final stages,
They were still finding new problems.
spaceflight is hard.
Yeah. So to sum it all up,
Bose CFT,
it was supposed to be an 8-day mission.
a quick trip to the ISS,
It turned into over 3 months
3 months,
with an uncrewed return.
and a lot of lessons learned.
They faced so many challenges.
Delays, leaks, thruster problems, computer glitches.
It was one thing after another
But they brought the astronauts home safely.
on a different spacecraft,
SpaceX Crew Dragon,
which shows that crew safety comes first.
always.
So what does this all mean?
What do you think?
I think it shows how complex spaceflight is.
Yeah.
And how risky it can be.
Especially when you're developing new technology.
Like Starliner.
What do you think this means for Boeing?
Their future in the commercial crew program.
Yeah,
That's a big question.
a lot to think about.
If you want to learn more.
Check out NASA's Commercial Crew Program.
And the Boeing Starliner program.
And if you're really interested in space,
Dive into the world of human space exploration.
it's an amazing field.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive
Deep dive.
into Bo CFT.
Go CFT.
We'll see you next time.
Next time.